All right. Welcome to your statistics lesson on data. What are data? And yes, data is a plural um, word. Data can be numbers, record names, or other labels collected in a particular context. Context is everything. Numbers without context are just numbers, they're not data. All right. So, how do we figure out the context? We need to know the W's, the who, what, when, where, why, if that's available, and how, which has the W at the end but is still important. Um, who and what are are absolutely essential. We have to know who we are measuring and what about them we are measuring. So here's a data table that does a really good job of showing the who and what, which gives us our context. So if you'll notice the what, the variables are across the top here. They're listed. We've got where the order is being shipped to, how much they paid, what the area code is, and then other information. And then we have the who here labeled for the rows. So we've got Catherine, Samuel, Chris, and Monique, and we can tell exactly what values for the variables go with which person. Okay, so let's talk about the who a little bit because you want to use different language if you are talking about people or if you're talking about animals or plants. Or inanimate objects or anything other than people. So the who specifically is the individual cases for which or whom we have collected data. So for everything, it's an individual case. We call those individual cases respondents if they are people answering a survey. We call them subjects or participants if it's people who are in an experiment, and animals, plants, inanimate subjects are called experimental units. People don't really like to be called that, so be sure to use respondents, subjects, or participants. Um, Some people refer to the actual data values as observations and are not clear on the who, but we need to know the who of the data so we can learn what the data say. Um, it doesn't give me a whole lot of information if I just look at test scores and I know that the test scores are scores, but I don't know which score corresponds to which student. I don't have the information I need. The what and why, basically, the what are the variables, and those are the characteristics recorded for each individual. Um, they should be given names that identify what has been measured. It should be meaningful. And to understand the variables, you must think about what you want to know. This is critical not only in reading information, consuming data, it is absolutely critical in creating data. If you are ever in a situation where you are writing your own survey questions, knowing precisely what you want to know will help you write the best questions. Some variables have units, and that tells us how each value has been measured and the scale of the measurement. So, what kind of what? There's two kinds of variables. There's categorical, which is also called qualitative, and then there's quantitative variables. Categorical variables are categories, and the values are just different names of the categories. And the answers about this question fall into the cases of those categories. Um, so, gender, race, ethnicity, um, all of those would be categorical variables. A quantitative variable is measured. Typically has units, and it answers question about the quantity of what's being measured. So, quantitative examples would include weight in pounds, height in inches, income in money, score in test points. All of those things are quantitative values. The why of our analysis helps shape what we think about and how we treat the variable. We have to know what it's used for. So, for instance, if we put what grade you were in, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, We might just represent that with 9, 10, 11, 12, but those aren't quantitative. They are just labels. They're just categories. It's the same thing as if we had freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So you really have to think about whether or not even a number is being used as a measurement or if it's used as a category. All right. So, in a student evaluation of instruction at a large university, one question asked students to evaluate the statement. The instructor was generally interested in teaching on the following scale: 1 disagree strongly, 2 disagree, 3 neutral, 4 agree, 5 agree strongly. So, is interest in teaching categorical or quantitative? There's numbers, but those numbers are just a way of representing the different cases for that category. And so we have a categorical variable. Now, in particular, these types of variables are called ordinal variables when they are a scale going from bad to good or good to bad. Okay, if there's some sort of order in the variables. Okay, so it's better to have a 2 than a 1 for the teacher. So there's an order there. Okay, when you count the cases in each category of a categorical variable, the counts are not the data, but something we summarize about the data. Okay, they're used as summaries. And so when you see a count and it's the summary of how many individuals fell into that particular category, then you're working with categorical variables. Now, we can also use counts as the variable itself. When we focus on the amount of something, we use counts differently. In this case, the counts are the data and the variable is quantitative. So here we've got an example where we have some data from Amazon, and they are tracking the growth of teenage customers each month to forecast video game sales, which is the why. They want to forecast video sales. The what are the teens, and the who is months. Okay, so number, and specifically the what is number of teenage customers. The who is each month, and the units or number of teenage customers. So this one could be a little confusing because it's like, well, why aren't teenage customers the who? Well, each case is a different month. Okay, so the months are who we are gathering data from. What are we gathering? We're gathering the number of teenagers. So really, this might be even better explained as number of teenage customers. Okay, so this number here, 123,456, represents a certain number of teenage customers, so that would be the units. Okay, there are special variables called identifier variables, and they are categorical variables with exactly one individual in each category. So examples of that are social security number, the ISBN for books, FedEx tracking numbers. Those are great. They are going to be numbers, but they are not going to be numbers that you want to try to average or anything like that. You don't want to analyze this. They are just simply methods of identification. Okay, so we have to know the who, what, and why to analyze data. But the more we know, the more we understand. So when and where gives us nice information about the context. So for example, values recorded from a large city can mean something different than values from a small town. For instance, when I lived in a small town, 20 minutes would be categorized as a long commute, and Houston is considered shorter than average. How? Also good to know. How the data are collected can make the difference between insight and nonsense. So, for example, results from internet surveys are often useless. Um, Simply because it is difficult to take that information and apply it to a larger population, and also because people self-select to answer them, and oftentimes people can answer them more than once. So there's so many problems with internet surveys. Just kind of take them with a grain of salt. The first step of data analysis should be to examine the W's. This is a key part of the think step of any analysis. And remember why the study was conducted, who the units or subjects are, and what the variables of interest are before you proceed with your analysis. They will inform what type of analysis you want to do. Okay, so here we have an example of the kind of problems I'm going to want you to do. So, for the following description of data, identify the W's, specify for each variable whether its use indicates that it should be treated as categorical or quantitative, and for any quantitative variable, identify the units in which it must be measured, or note that units were not provided. Okay, so let's tackle the problem that we have first by identifying those W's, and then we'll go back to the what and decide if they're categorical or quantitative. If they're quantitative, then we'll get the units. Okay, the Gallup poll conducted a representative telephone survey of 1,180 American voters during the first quarter of 1999. Among the reported results were the voters' region, Northwest, South, etc., age, party affiliation, and whether or not the person had voted in the 1998 midterm congressional election. Okay, so let's do our W's here. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. All right, so the who, or remember, it's not who's conducting the research, it is who is being researched. What description would you give the individuals involved who have something that's being measured? And so that would be the 1,180 Americans. The what are all the variables being measured of those individuals. So, region, age, political affiliation, and whether or not the person voted in the 1998 midterm congressional election. When? First quarter of 1999. So that's important to know because that tells you, oh, this information was gathered right after that 1998 midterm congressional election. If this same survey was done last year, you wouldn't really have much faith in the answers because there are so many people would not remember whether they voted in the 1998 midterm election or not. So, knowing when the data were gathered is important. Where, since it's American voters and we're talking about regions in America, it is logical to say the United States. Gallup poll is a United States company. Why? For the Gallup poll, no other explanation is given. They just, in general, want to know about American voters. And how? It tells us it was a telephone survey. All right, so now we're going to look at the variables and what type they are. If it's quantitative, we're going to give units. So the first variable is region, and that would be categorical. The second variable is age, and that's going to be quantitative, and it's not specified. Is it years, months, days? Unless we're interviewing infants who would not have voted in the last election, it's most likely years. Okay, the variable political affiliation is categorical. Whether or not a person voted in 1998 is also categorical. All right, that's it. So do the problems to try on your own, and I will see you in class.